All right, I'm Michael Hartzman. Today is Tuesday, March 18th, 2025, and on with my partner, as always, Dominic Tavella. How are you this evening, Dominic?
Doing well, Mike. Back in our New York office. So happy to be in the same continent, same time zone as you. How about that?
I love it. I love the fact you always go east for me because unless I call you at 5 o'clock, I could always get you and you're always awake. So I always appreciate that. And happy St. Patrick's Day to you and everyone else who celebrated yesterday. So, St. Patrick's is is always the color green, but it's a terrible segue, Dom. But we've been kind of seeing in a sea of red for the last couple of weeks. So let me just do the numbers real quick. Year to date, the S&P is down 3.85%. The Dow year to date is down 2.1. These are as of Friday's close. And the Nasdaq is down almost 8. And that compares to just 2 weeks ago when the S&P was still up 1.4%. The Dow was up 3.3%, and the Nasdaq was only down 2.3%. So it looks like in 2 weeks, Dom, we've given up about 5%. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but things appear to be still a little unsteady heading into the last 2 weeks of March.
Yeah, Mike, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, and that means looking at the picture a little bit deeper than just the last couple of weeks. In the last month and a half, the S&P is about 10% off its high,
Yeah.
maybe just a little bit less now. The Nasdaq, my gosh, I think it's somewhere closer to 15% off its high. The Dow, the big winner this year on a year to date, but still off well off its high. And we won't even talk about mid caps and small caps. And it's been a risk off trade where anything that remotely looks like it was more volatile or had more alpha in it originally gave it all back. So I think we've used the word a lot in our calls here. It's been tariffs, 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 and consumer and businesses are starting to feel a little bit blue about it.
You said that this morning. It's tariffs, 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 and I threw in interest rates, right? Because I still think the Fed meeting. I think it's tomorrow and Wednesday. No, today's Tuesday. The meeting today and tomorrow, right? Um, I think the market's also looking for a clue or a hint that the Feds might be willing to put interest rate cuts back on the table with inflation continuing to get a little softer. And I think, Dom, the market's looking for some sort of catalyst. One, either interest rate cuts or certainly the threat of interest rates going up being removed temporarily, and or Trump getting some of these nations he's put these really high tariffs on and getting them to negotiate and landing on a rate, I don't know, 10%, 12%, that the economy could more likely handle. And I think if we got both of those as catalysts, the market could really, have another leg. But I think if we got one, we could at least calm down a little bit.
Well, two quick comments, Mike. The first is if you actually look at market interest rates, now what the Fed is doing, one of the few winners this year have been actual bonds. People now have been selling stocks, and when they sell stocks, they have a flight to quality, so they buy interest-bearing bonds. The 10-year Treasury is up almost 3% so far this year. Corporate bonds are up about 2, global bonds are up about 2. So people are selling stocks, buying bonds. So that's pushed the prices of bonds higher. So it's been a good environment for interest-bearing bonds. But I do agree with you, Mike, that the Fed taking action on interest rates later this year, I think will be a positive. But I'm still going to come back to that we're dealing with all this uncertainty. We had a great guest just a couple of weeks ago, Mike, that talked about the small business community and how they've lost some confidence about where the economy is going. And now we're actually seeing the data on TV that's documenting what that gentleman said on our podcast. When the businesses lose confidence, don't have that certainty, they don't want to hire, they don't want to make business investments. And the consumer confidence has fell off a cliff. And when the consumer loses confidence, they stop spending money. So we need to get some of this confidence back into thinking, businesses, consumers, and then hopefully this trend will turn around.
Yeah, and you're right, obviously about the small businesses. And that was Jeff Oak from Vistage who brought us that report. But I also think, Dominic, there's such a mood in general with all the with with all the Doge cuts, and then all the lawsuits, and the people are fired, they're getting their jobs back. And we've said before, no one would argue that the government has to be more efficient and the government needs to eliminate waste, but it's the chaos of the way this has been done that has really changed, I think, the mood of the entire country and their appetite to spend money right now.
Yeah, Mike, I think you're 100% right. I mean, as you have, I have seen clips of prior administrations, Democratic administrations, like, hey, the government's way too bloated, it's way too inefficient, we're wasting too much money, we don't have the luxury to do that. But the tact that's being used by this administration, although somebody would argue it's necessary, we do need to really cut the fat out of the programs. The way it's happening is somewhat scary. Am I going too far on a limb here, Mike, by saying scary? You're watching people lose their jobs, and that's never a pleasant. Even if it's the necessary evil, it's not happy. It's not joyful. And I think in some ways it's kind of a wet blanket on people's mood, and that does have economic implications.
Yeah, and it cascades, right? Because it doesn't have to be you who lost their job. It could be your first cousin. It could be your uncle. But it just kind of permeates through the economy. This vibe, which I heard, someone describe what the mood in Washington as the vibe is very negative. So I do think it has a trickle effect. And I don't think we did a podcast since Trump predicted a recession. And I clearly think, Dom, that was a self-inflicted wound and an unnecessary comment on his part. But, that was 1,000 points that day. So, look, I'm no expert. I'm not a Trump whisperer by any stretch of the imagination, but I can't imagine what he was thinking when he made that comment. He had to know what was going to happen Monday morning.
You brought up I thought it was a pretty brilliant point earlier today, Mike, that maybe it was intentional, maybe trying to put some pressure on the Fed. Federal Reserve controls obviously interest rates, and they're looking at their dual mandate, i.e., full employment and low inflation. And maybe if they felt that the economy was going to roll over, they'd be more inclined to lower interest rates and fuel economic growth. But this is really, I believe, Mike, and I could be completely wrong on this thought, but I really think right now there's a loss of confidence, clarity about where future economic growth is going to be, where it's going to look like. And until we get some of that haziness cleared up and we get a better, cleaner picture, I think we're in for more of this, unfortunately.
So thank you for attaching the word brilliant to me. The people who know me well might disagree, but I do have to give the founder of my company, Milton Konigsberg, the credit for that, Dom, because Milton, who founded my company in 1960, I believe, still going strong. God bless him. He and I were having a conversation last week, and he made that point that Trump will virtually do anything to get what he wants, and he really wants lower interest rates. So he may have, I don't want to say tanked the market on purpose, but put a little bit more pressure on Powell than Powell needed.
And look, Mike, just we're going to run out of time here, so I want to get this thought out. I really believe at the end of the day, whether it's political motivation, because we do have the midterm elections right around the corner. I know we just finished with an election, but what are we, like less than a year and a half? The politicking will start within a year. So we got the midterm elections coming along. We certainly have the legacy of Trump's presidency on the line. I think he's going to work really hard to push it to the limit, try to negotiate the best deals he possibly can. But I'm really convinced he's not going to push it over the cliff. Although I'm sure there's plenty of people that'll argue with me on that point.
They are, but not me, because I don't think there's any president, Republican or Democrat, who wants a recession on their resume.
Exactly right, Mike. I agree with you.
Thank you. So tonight's guest is Chris Adrian from JP Morgan. She's been on the show in the past. She's the executive director and the 529 specialist at JP Morgan Asset Management. She's a great partner of ours, gives us great access to people, great research, great investments. Chris is part of that. We appreciate having her. And tonight we're going to make it a little bit more personal because Chris has been talking about 529s for parents and grandparents, I think for 15 years now. And now she's beginning her own journey on getting her junior in high school off to college next year. So she's going to let us know how her search is going, how her savings all these years has benefited her. And Dom, just give us an update on 529s in general and see any laws or regulations that may or may not have changed.
Yeah, and obviously we love this particular subject. And if you're doing wealth planning, you have to be talking about this with your clients. And then on a personal level, both you and I have grandchildren, Mike, and I actually love to put money away in these plans for mine, and I'm sure you do as well, your grandchildren.
Yeah, I have to give you a shout out. You got that 529 open for baby Penelope, mm, pretty much before she got out of the hospital. So
Yeah,
yeah.
again, just I know we're running out of time, but she wasn't even out of the hospital yet. And like, did you get me that social security number yet? So if you have to spend money, this is just a joyful way to do it. Put it away for your grandchildren's education.
And I'm just saying, if you run out of your own grandchildren, we could use all the help we could get on our end.
Well, I think yours will be just fine, knowing how you and Donna feel about them. But hey, it's a blessing.
It is. So we'll be right back with Chris Adrian from JP Morgan Asset Management. All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with my partner Dominic Tavella, and our guest this evening, returning guest, Chris Adrian from JP Morgan Asset Management. She's their 529 specialist. Good evening, Chris. How are you?
Doing so great. Thanks so much for having me back. Appreciate you
Well,
guys.
welcome back, Chris.
So happy to talk about 529s with all of you too.
Thank you. And I know you're a busy lady, and we appreciate you making the time after 5 o'clock because you're in Ohio, so you're in the same time zone we are.
We are, and the kids are actually downstairs, tucked away in the basement. So hopefully they won't pop in here in a minute to ask
Well,
where dinner is. But I think we have plenty of time.
well, you know
All
what?
right,
If
but
we
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Mike. If they pop in with homework questions, just do it. This is important. We got to get them into college, so don't mind us. Just let them pop the questions.
Yeah, and look, if you want to grab Joe because he's a young man we're going to be talking about for a few minutes, that'd be great too. But all kidding aside, you mentioned last year that you're going to begin this college journey this year, and lo and behold, here you are right? Beginning this college journey right on cue. Try, I think you told me Joe is a junior in high school.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
what I don't even know where to begin. What has this been like for you now to have to kind of eat your own cooking? Like, where do you even begin?
Yeah. So 11 years ago, when I started with the New York 529 team, my kids were still little. Joe was 10. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Joe was even younger yet. He was 5. Kate was 2. And so I was contemplating, okay, for my own kids, how much do I need to start socking away in their 529s? It was super eye-opening back then because the cost of college, as you know, grows about 6% every year. And I needed to extrapolate that number further for them. So for Joe, this is wonderful because we started to do something called kitchen chats, where we'd sit around our own kitchen table and I'd share slides from a little guide that JP Morgan puts together. We'd talk about the cost of college, we would talk about financial aid and scholarships, and then we'd talk about the 529 that mom and dad had opened for Joe and Kate. And for both of my kids, it actually made them more invested in their schooling and trying to get great grades. Joe actually moved his grades. Well, back then he wasn't getting A's, B's, or C's, but now that he's in high school, he gets all A's and they're in AP classes, which is phenomenal because that counts for college credit too. But for me, it's making my journey easier because it's really opening doors to a lot of great schools and opportunities for Joe. We just visited Miami of Ohio, which I know is really popular there in New York. We have a lot of New York clients who send their kids to Miami of Ohio. Not sure if you and Dom have heard of that school before. Um,
Yes,
Joe
we
wants to
have.
be, okay, Joe wants to be a mechanical engineer.
Hmm.
So his first pick is actually the Ohio State University. So they have a great engineering program. That's my alma mater. So secretly, I'd love for him to go there. It's 15 minutes up the street. He did visit there last month. He loved it. Well, he's been to a number of Buckeye football games, which really helps the cause as well because it's great energy. But Miami of Ohio, he was blown away with how beautiful the university was and all of the programs that they offer. They actually have a 3-in-1 program where you can do 3 years of undergraduate and then 1 year of grad school. So in 4 years, you can graduate with an MBA. It really perked up his ears. So I know I just did a lot of talking, but it's been this amazing journey. And I feel like it's all come full circle because we've been talking about it for so long with their own 2 kids.
So, Chris, just real quick, because obviously you and I and Michael talk about 529s probably every day, right, Mike? I don't think a day goes by that the words don't come out of our mouths. But let's give us a quick overview. What is a 529? How does it work? Who puts money in it? Just give us a quick synopsis of what does that picture look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So a 529, I think about them very much like a Roth IRA, where it's after tax dollars that get invested into the 529. It grows tax deferred. And as long as the money is used for a qualified expense, all of your earnings come out tax free. And then there within New York, you've got amazing state tax benefits as well. You can deduct up to 5,000 each year if you're an individual tax filer. And if you're married filing jointly, you can deduct up to 10 grand every year. It's a savings of roughly $600 for your average New York couple, but that's significant. That's good savings. The other big benefit is an estate planning benefit where you can do 5 times the annual gift limit. This year, the annual gift limit is 19,000 per child or grandchild. You can double that, but within a 529, you can multiply that by 5. So for a married couple, you can gift up to 190,000 this year. Or if you're an individual filer, you can gift up to 95,000 this year. Significant money you can move outside of your estate where it grows tax-free outside of your estate and then can be used for your child or grandchild's future. Now you can't gift again for another 5 years, but some families elect to do it again in year 6. So that's another huge benefit of a 529. And then they're also really flexible. You can change the beneficiary up to first cousin. You can change the beneficiary to yourselves. So Dom, for you or Michael, if you do have a leftover balance after your grandkids go off to college, you can use it for yourself. We had a grandmother use it for culinary school a couple of weeks ago in Italy, actually. Dom, I know you just came back. So I thought that was really cool. She was so excited that it would be considered a qualified expense for herself. And then brand new, and I know we'll get to this a little bit further, if you do have a leftover balance, 529s have become even more expansive. You can roll over up to 35,000 into a Roth IRA. So very, very flexible in the way that they can be used. Doesn't just have to be used for college or vocational school or a trade school. So let me pause there and see if you guys have questions on that.
Well, I do want to stop right there, Chris, on the Roth conversion feature, because one, I think, common misconception I get a lot from clients is they think they could do the 35,000 in one shot, and they cannot. It's subject to the Roth annual limits, correct?
That's correct. Yep. So this year it's up to 7,000 that you can roll over. So what a lot of clients are contemplating is because it's 35,000 is the max cap, they're doing that 7,000 over the next 5 years. And then they'll hit that 35K max cap. You do, oh, go ahead.
Just to follow up,
Sure.
it's you can't be a wise guy, right? You can't make your wife or your husband the beneficiary and then open up a Roth for yourself. It has to be the original beneficiary or that beneficiary for a certain period of time, correct?
It does. So the account has to be opened 15 years or longer to be able to do it. And you can't roll over anything you've put in over the last 5 years. So what the federal government is trying to make sure of is that we're not dumping a bunch of money into our older 529s and then rolling that right into the Roth that same year. Now, there are some CPAs that are considering them more flexible, where the way the provision was written in Secure 2.0, it's a little bit of a gray area. So if you change the beneficiary, does that reset the 15-year window? The industry is thinking that it doesn't, and that you could change the beneficiary to yourself and do a Roth rollover. But I will caution, check with your CPA, make sure that that is the policy that they read also in Secure 2.0. And hopefully, in the interim, the IRS comes out with more guidelines because it is written so flexibly and so gray at this point.
Dom,
And
I
it is
apologize.
relatively.
Dom, I know,
No, go ahead, Mike.
I know we do the show together, but I just got to ask one more question. I've never done this before.
Sure.
Is that person, if I make myself the beneficiary, am I then still subject to the same earned income limits?
You are. So you do have to have earned income
No,
as
no,
a
I don't mean that.
beneficiary.
I didn't mean on the top end. Meaning,
Oh, so
I
great news.
apologize.
No, that's okay. There's no income threshold. So anyone can do the Roth rollover. They just have to have earned income to be able to do it. So it's almost like a backdoor Roth, except you're not paying any tax on it.
I think it's better than a backdoor Roth. Dom, I'm going to shut up now. It's all yours. You have the rest of the
I'll
show.
say yeah, but that's a kind of an insight that I was not aware of. So rather than get into the weeds too much, we might reach out to you later on, get through the weeds, and then maybe bring it up on another show. But I obviously understood that we'll call it the child could take advantage of this Roth conversion. Didn't understand that perhaps even the parent might be able to do it. So again, we'll leave that one alone. But it is an interesting point that if we think about how restrictive 529 plans were, maybe even a decade ago, today they're way broader, can be used for a lot of things that maybe, I remember it being tuition only, not too long ago, right? So we talked about this Roth conversion, but what other things can this money be used for? We're going to say on behalf of the child, at least for this conversation.
Yeah, so Don, the good news is they do become more flexible as the federal government adds more qualified provisions. So you can use them for tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, computers, laptops, ink, things of that nature. You can also use them for apprenticeship programs. That's relatively new as of a couple of years ago. You can also use it for trade or vocational school. A lot of people ask, well, what if my child doesn't go off to a traditional college or university? That's okay. You can even use it abroad. So if your child studies abroad, as long as it's listed on the FAFSA website as an accredited university or college, international schools are included as well. And then also K through 12 tuition, but I will caution the state of New York still considers that non-qualified. So if you're a New York taxpayer, I wouldn't suggest using it for K through 12 because they'll claw back any previous state tax deductions that you've taken. So it can be a pretty big ding for some clients. If you have clients outside of New York, like Florida, for example, they don't have to worry about that. And they could use it for K through 12. So very, very flexible. And then obviously the ability to create a retirement account in the future for your child or grandchild is also really exciting. A lot of families use these as legacy 529s. There is no age at which you have to take the money out.
Hmm.
There used to be these old Coverdell educational savings accounts, and you had to pull those out by age 30. You don't have to worry about that with 529s. They can be held to perpetuity. So a lot of families will just continue to hold the 529 for future grandkids and use them as a legacy that way.
Chris, you're speaking of grandchildren. Is there, you mentioned earlier, you could even make a first cousin a new beneficiary.
Right.
I can't even imagine how you would prove that you related to a first cousin. I can't even imagine Dom trying to do the paperwork to prove that someone's a first cousin without his head exploding.
Yeah, I would just call your office, Mike,
Yeah,
and that would be handled that way. So,
yeah. But is there also, when a grandparent passes away, does it have to be legacy that a child is the next owner? So we always talk about the beneficiary. Let's talk about the owner. Is there any
Yeah.
limitations on how ownership can change?
No, so typically people name what's called a successor owner. I always encourage people to add successor owner.
Mhm.
If the original account owner might pass away or become disabled, the successor owner can take over. And in that way, it completely removes it from probate as well, because we can easily transition it to the successor owner. Um, we would never redeem the 529 if the original account owner passes away, just becomes a really seamless transfer of ownership. Most people name their spouse as the successor owner. Some people name their child as the successor owner. So if you're a grandparent that's opening these for your grandchildren, you could name your child as the account owner. And sometimes that's an easier transition as well.
so in our world, and I think it's kind of joyful and glorious, frankly, as a grandparent. Our clients, ourselves included, love putting money away for our grandchildren. So this is where, having the successor owner, number one, is kind of important, right? Hope to God these grandparents, me included, live to see these kids graduate from college, but that's really important. But it's actually a great savings tool, especially because the grandparents typically have the money. The kids are still struggling with making mortgage payments, and you have those maybe decades of tax-free growth.
That's exactly right. And because you can hold them to perpetuity, families could have these for several generations down the road, which is wonderful. If college costs are increasing almost 6% every year, that's a really big bar that they need to reach once a newborn reaches the age of 18. So a lot of families are contemplating, let's start as early as we can. We even have some families that are starting family planning. And you don't necessarily have to have a beneficiary already born. You can name yourself as the beneficiary. And then once your child is born, simply change the beneficiary to your newborn. So we have some people, especially at JP Morgan, that have started 5 years before their child's even born, have all of those tax-free earnings. Sometimes they'll use it for themselves to go back for an MBA or some advanced degree, but just really cool that you can open it even before the child's born. I think that's a great feature.
I don't think I knew that, Mike. Did you know that you could do it for yourself?
I do know that. Yes. I don't want to show off, but that is one of the things I didn't know.
Oh, good for you. Again, brilliant, I think was a word I used now twice to describe you tonight. But Chris, joking aside, we talk about this tax-free growth, right? And I don't think people understand the power of that. I was blessed to have another grandchild born just recently, and I was excited to open this account. But this is a child that's less than a month old, and she will have maybe 18, 20 years of hopefully tax free, but tax free growth. Can you just spend a minute on the power of that?
Yeah. So what's phenomenal about that gift that you made, that power of compounding over the next 18 years, let's assume maybe it's a 6% rate of return. If you did the accelerated gift, we actually did that math. So if you did the full 190,000, and Dom, maybe you did, maybe you were super generous. When that grows over the next 18 years and she goes off to college, she'll have over $263,000 invested in that 529. Oh, I'm sorry. It's more than that. If you only did the 95,000, she'd have over 263,000 in the 529 18 years from now. If you did 190,000, she would have over 526,000 in the 529, and that would cover 87% of private college costs for her in the future. So just I know that's a lot of numbers, but I think that's amazing that just that one gift. If you
Well,
never
and the beauty of that is there's no 1099s generated, there's no income taxes paid on that annually, there's no reporting, there's no tax filings. It just grows in the account for that entire period of time. And then when you withdraw it, if you're using it for qualified expenses, completely tax free.
Exactly right. Yep. And they'll get a 1099-Q in January showing that withdrawal. They don't have to file that with their taxes. They're just going to keep that with all their invoices, all of their bills. And then if they're ever audited in the future, they could pull that out of their tax file. But that's the beauty is that they are pretty easy to set up and really easy to make a withdrawal. So now that I'm living it with my own Joe, next year when I go to make a withdrawal, hopefully it's for something like Yale or Miami or Ohio State, I can come back and share with you how easy it was to make those payments.
Chris, that's a great spot to stop for a few minutes. Let's take a break. And when we come back, I want to talk to you about some of the misconceptions 529s have as it relates to financial aid. A lot of people think if they start at 529, they're never getting financial aid. So I want to go over some of that with you and also want to talk about ways we can invest the 529.
Absolutely. I'd love to help.
Okay, so we'll be right back after a quick break with Chris Adrian, 529 specialist at JP Morgan Asset Management. All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with my partner Dominic Tavella and our returning guest this evening, Chris Adrian, talking all things 529s. She's the 529 specialist at JP Morgan Asset Management. Chris, let's talk about some of the myths that are out there about 529s and financial aid. I cannot tell you how many people over my career have said to me they made a mistake by opening a 529, or I gave them bad advice by recommending a 529, because now I screw them out of, or they screw themselves out of financial aid. So, can you kind of try and debunk the relationship between financial aid and saving for college on your own, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a huge myth. I'm so glad that you brought that up. So when you look at the FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Every family that has a senior getting ready to go off to college is encouraged to fill it out, even if they think they won't be eligible for much in way of federal financial aid. The schools actually use that to determine your aid package at the school level. So that's the first thing. But with FAFSA, there's a very specific formula that's used. And the biggest driver of the financial aid formula is the parent's income. So that's what I would want to call out. But 529s only count up to 5.6% of the formula. So if you have a checking or a savings account or a taxable brokerage account, it's all going to count the exact same as a 529, and that's only up to 5.6% on the FAFSA formula. Parents' income, though, sliding scale between 22 and 47%. If you're in a lower income tax bracket, you'll be closer to the 22%. If you're in the highest income tax bracket, you're closer to the 47%. But again, that's the biggest driver. So I think what you're hearing from families is that maybe they don't realize a 529 only counts up to 5.6%. Now, here's a change that FAFSA made last year, though. If grandma and grandpa want to open the 529, it's 0% of the financial aid formula. It used to be that you'd have to count it 2 years later when you pulled money out of the 529. You no longer have to do that. So for grandma and grandpa, it will always be 0%. So I know you and Dom have 529s open for your grandchildren. Great news is you don't have to count that, and it will not impact their financial aid formula. That also applies if aunties or uncles or anyone else that's a non-parent want to open the 529. So that's
So,
the big.
Chris, I just want to focus on that one point for a second because you actually kind of stole some of my thunder. How would they even know if a grandparent set up? All of us have filled out a FAFSA form at one time in our life or not, but how would they even know what a grandparent did? Or in the case of this week, I had an aunt who had no children of her own. She set up 529s for her nieces and nephews. God bless that she's able to do that. How would they even know that somebody outside of the parent has set one of these accounts up?
So on the FAFSA application previously, it would say, did you receive any other resources from a non-parent? And it was an honor system where the student would have to report that, or the parent would have to report that on the FAFSA. That question is completely eliminated now. So even if grandma and grandpa pay the tuition directly to the school, which is something some grandparents do, don't have to report that either. So that's a big change for a lot of families that actually benefits their aid package. Now, the other piece, though, that I wanted to debunk is a lot of families think they're going to get a lot in way of financial aid. And the reality is most families get phased out of federal Pell Grants. In fact, the adjusted gross income to receive a federal Pell Grant this year is $48,000 or less. So most families get phased out of those. But the average scholarship that they receive is about $7,800 this year. And when you think about the big cost of college, the average in-state public college is $25,000 this year. Receiving $7,800 in way of scholarship is great, but it's definitely not enough to offset the entirety of the cost. So that's one other myth that we typically hear is families think that they're going to get a lot in way of federal financial aid or school aid for that matter.
Yes, if I can, I'm going to focus on the Adrian family for one more minute.
Sure.
So I heard you say that Joe's getting A's, he's in AP classes, things are going great, and Kate's younger. I don't care what her grades are. In the event that Joe happens to get a full ride to the school of his choice, can you and your husband turn around and give the 529 straight away to Kate and just get the money out of Joe's name?
Yes. So I can transfer the beneficiary at any time to Kate or their first cousins. So my nieces and nephews, if I'm feeling generous, could transfer to them. Or I could leave it for future generations, that legacy, 529. I could roll it over to the Roth IRA for you to retire on account. Um, and then the other piece that I was going to mention is that for some families, they're thinking about going back to school themselves. So similar to that grandmother, my husband has asked if he could go back to golfing school. And PGA, it's called Q School. And I haven't looked to check to see if it's on FAFSA as a accredited institution. But if it was, then my husband, Dave, would go back and go to Q School. And he keeps asking if he can use the leftover balance.
So number one, Dave is brilliant. Number two, Dom, do you have any idea how many more 529s we could open up if we could tell the father he could save money for golf school?
Yeah, we would lose the wives as clients. And just for the record, my wife would be a hard no. Yeah, the grandkids are getting it. You're not. But it's and I did want to bring up the issue of trade schools because we're always talking about higher education. We're always talking about, a Harvard but in today's environment, trades are very in short supply, people that actually know what they're doing. And my God, some of these trade workers are getting paid. We're not joking when we're saying they're getting paid more than doctors and lawyers are getting paid. So I think, not everybody's meant to go to a 4-year college, hypothetically. So maybe just a minute focus on how we would use it for trade schools, how it works, or are there any limitations at all?
The only limitation is the trade school or vocational school has to be listed on the FAFSA website. FAFSA has a school code search where you can actually interactively put in the name of the school, what city and state they're in, and just make sure that it comes up with a federal code. As long as it has that code, you're good to use the 529 for that. For apprenticeships, though, a lot of people have asked about apprenticeships because that is a new qualified expense. It has to be listed on the Department of Labor's website as a qualified apprenticeship program. That's the only other distinction that you need to make sure of, but very, very flexible. And I know a lot of people have used it for cosmetology school for their daughters. Almost every cosmetology school that I've
If you want to be a welder or a carpenter, a plumber, again, you're going to make way more money. But putting that aside, those kinds of education programs can all be paid for using the 529.
exactly. Yeah. And supplies are included. So if for that particular trade school, they need to be purchasing supplies that are required by the trade school, can use the 529 for those. So that's a huge benefit. Now, typically with trade schools, there is no on-campus housing. So that's where you can use the off-campus housing provision. So within 529s, you can also use them for off-campus. And as long as they're enrolled more than half time, you can use up to the stated room and board of a local university. So that's pretty cool, is that your child could be living outside of the house, even though they're going off to trade school. And you can use the 529 for room and board as well.
Chris, to my knowledge, and I get this question a lot, I'm sure, Dom, you get the question a lot as well. To my knowledge, a purchase of a car is not a qualified expense, correct?
That's correct. Can't use it for car or transportation, unfortunately. But there is an active bill right now in Congress where they are proposing that you may be able to use it for transportation in the future. So hopefully when I come back, we'll have even more expanded qualified expenses. Same with accreditations. A lot of people are getting certifications at a Google or some other school like that. Those right now are not considered qualified. Certifications are not. So hopefully that and transportation will be included in the near future.
And come back to a point we made earlier. A lot of the things that you just described, Chris, weren't covered a decade ago, right? Things like room and board or a computer. So the idea, and we just mentioned the Roth, which is a huge, huge update that happened this past year. So we don't know what the picture is going to look like tomorrow, but having the money, this is a point I make with my clients all the time. Oh, I don't know if I can use it for this. I don't know. Having the money is always better than not having the money.
That sounds
Right,
so
Mike?
obvious, right?
I think I could go on a limb on that one, right? I don't know whether you're going to get aid or you're not going to get aid, but I know having the money is always better than not having the money.
Yeah, and you said I was the brilliant one.
It does give you enormous peace of mind, even for myself and Joe. When we're contemplating schools, a lot of families have to make tough decisions because they don't have the 529 or they haven't invested enough and are relying on that federal financial aid that they're just not receiving. Those aid packages are even smaller today than they were last year. So having that 529 gives you huge peace of mind. It's opened a lot of doors for Joe where he can look at almost any university that he wants to. And for our family, we know that we'll be able to afford that. So I know I'm biased because I've done these for a number of years, but it's just such a wonderful feeling to know that I'm giving him the best gift, that gift of education and that peace of mind for us, where we're not having to make a tough choice.
I mean, and again, just to turn it back to your family, and I appreciate you allowing us to do this tonight and make it personal. The Ohio State University and Miami of Ohio are both public schools, and Yale is one of the most expensive schools on the planet.
Yes,
So what you just said, it must be a great feeling to know that you spend all these years preparing, that you don't have to lose any sleep. If God willing, he's fortunate enough and wants to go to Yale, you guys might be good.
that's exactly right. And we may have to borrow a little bit from Kate's if that's the case. We could move some over from Kate's to Joe's to help make up that gap. But yeah, just enormous peace of mind. We've been so blessed too to be able to do that accelerated gift. My parents actually also did the accelerated gift into Kate's account a number of years ago. So we were talking earlier about that power of compounding, Dom, where you had mentioned that you put money in for your granddaughter. My parents were able to do that for Kate as well. And so that will give her a huge cushion, especially if she goes to the University of Oklahoma, which is where she's thinking about going. And out of state schools are even more expensive. They're double what an in state public school will be.
Yeah, you know what? If you give Joe some of Kate's 529 money, that's going to come up in therapy. So just prepared for that as well.
It's true. He's always asking, what is my 529 balance? Is it bigger than Kate's? All he wants to know.
But you're bringing up an interesting point. Maybe, again, spend just a minute so we clarify for people. I know we talked about changing the beneficiary, but you actually can move money between accounts. I've had many cases where one child goes to a high-end 4-year school and the other child goes to the local 2-year school for whatever reason. You're allowed to move it between the accounts
That's
and pay
exactly.
those expenses.
Yeah, and a really simple transfer too. You can do a partial beneficiary change and just move a little bit of the money over, or you can move all of it. So very, very simple to do over the phone or online, as long as those two accounts are already open.
Yeah, we have tons of clients, and this is actually a pretty common occurrence for us. Not everybody goes to the same school, the same cost to that school. You've mentioned some child gets it could be a scholastic grant, or it could be an athletic one. So the need for those dollars can shift even in a short period of time. The ability to pick up the phone and move it between accounts is just powerful.
It is, and we tried to make that as simple as we could for families. Even if they want to keep one account, some families only open one 529 for all of their children, you can do that. And then you would just call in and change the beneficiary over the phone and take a withdrawal. So very, very flexible in the way that they can be used, depending on what might be best for the family.
Chris, I want to use the last 4 minutes of the show to talk about how we invest these things. We didn't even bring that up. I'm a big fan of the age-weighted glide path. It's not the only solution. So we have about 4 minutes left. If you could talk a little bit about how to invest monies in a 529, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So every 529 plan across the country usually has three different types of investments. The one that you just mentioned is the age-based portfolios, where it invests based on the age of the child today and automatically rolls down the glide path as your child gets older. So you don't have to call in when your child turns 6, for example, and shift to a new portfolio. We'll automatically do that for the client, which is great. The second option is an asset allocation portfolio. Our JP Morgan New York plan has 6 of those that they can pick from, anywhere from aggressive to conservative. So for me, I wanted to take a little bit more risk for my kids. I didn't put them in the age-based, I put them in the aggressive portfolio because I needed to let that run and catch up, if you will. And that really benefited, especially with this huge rally that the market has had over the last decade. Not so much the last couple of weeks, as you pointed out earlier, but that's okay. It's going to rebound. And then the third way that you can invest are what are called individual portfolios. So if you're more mix it, match it, or you want to create your own model portfolio, you can pick from 20 different individual portfolios and create your own model allocation. And I know that you and Dom could help the client select what might be best for them, but very, very flexible in that we've got a number of different investment options. And that's true for every 529 plan across the country, not just New York's. So
And
hopefully
perhaps maybe a little bit negative, but there are restrictions on how often you can change that investment profile, correct?
that's right. You can only make an exchange within a 529 twice per calendar year. That's actually a federal mandate, not at the state level. As an industry, we're trying to expand that and make that bigger. But for now, it's only twice per calendar year. And that prevents people from trying to day trade their 529 or move in and out of portfolios frequently. It allows them to keep that power of compounding riding as long as they can.
And to your point there, there's not a plan in the country, to my knowledge, that allows you can't even buy individual stocks.
That's right.
It's mutual
Yep.
funds and ETFs only, correct?
Correct. Yep. And they're always predetermined
Right,
portfolios
right.
that the state has created with us as the investment manager.
Dom, I'm going to give you the last word.
Thanks, Mike. I'm gonna just kind of sum it up. My favorite client in this market, in the 529 plan market, is the grandparent. If you think about life, most parents are trying to pay their mortgage and they're trying to pay their car payments on a monthly basis, and maybe they have a few extra dollars, to put away. But grandparents usually are past those days, and they're looking for resources and how to get them to their children and their grandchildren. I think it's just a wonderful gifting tool, and we talked about it getting out of your taxable estate.
So, Chris,
Oh,
it's, I think, the third or fourth time you joined us. And thank you tonight for allowing us to be in your home and talk about your journey and your husband, Dave, with Kate and Joe. We appreciate you really, making it personal for us tonight. It was, I think, more valuable than the other shows we did.
My pleasure. This is
we wish
honestly my
you the
favorite thing.
best and your son and his endeavors, and I'm sure it's all going to work out great.
Thank you so much. I'll be sure to report back when he gets his acceptance letter.
You can tell us on the next one when we invite you back. How is it going?
I would love to do that.
And I promise to invite you back when my grandchild that was just born, she goes through her education process. I promise to invite you back for that one.
18 years from now, I would love that. Then
It'd
we'll
be
feel
my
so
pleasure.
good.
Both of us will be, and Mike, I'll include you too. All
Thank
three of
you.
us will be here.
And listen, I hope Dave gets into Q school. So, on that note, we are out of time. And Dom and I will be back next week with a new edition of the Lebenthal Report.